It looked like nothing more than a family photo, until historians noticed the child in the background. The image arrived quietly at the Massachusetts Historical Society, tucked inside a worn leather portfolio. It had been part of the estate of Elizabeth Hartwell, a retired schoolteacher from Boston, who had recently passed away at the age of 93. Among a stack of old documents and personal items, one photo stood out right away. It was a formal portrait from 1889, beautifully preserved in sepia tones. The photo showed a well-off family posed in a grand parlor, every detail carefully arranged. Dr. Rachel Montgomery, a historian who focused on post-Civil War America, gently pulled a photo from his protective sleeve and took a closer look. The scene captured a father in a dark suit, his expression stern, a watch chain glinting across his vest. Beside him sat a woman in an elegant dress with puffed sleeves, typical of the time. Standing stiffly nearby were their teenage son and daughter. Behind them, the room practically announced their wealth. Ornate wallpaper, heavy drapes, polished furniture lit up by the photographer's flash powder. Rachel had studied hundreds of portraits like this one, but something felt different about it. In the background, just slightly out of focus, she spotted two small figures sitting on a Persian rug. Curious, she leaned closer. Two little girls, maybe 6 or 7 years old, were playing quietly. One had blonde hair styled in ringlets. The other had tightly coiled dark hair. That's strange, Rachel said to herself, picking up a magnifying glass. It was unusual to see children playing in the background of a formal family photo. Normally, everyone was posed. Everyone was meant to be there. Her colleague James Chin looked up from his desk. "What V you got?" "A family portrait. Late 1880s, probably 1890, she replied. "But there are two kids in the background who clearly weren't part of the official pose." James walked over, adjusting his glasses to get a better look. Maybe the photographer just didn't notice them or couldn't afford to retake the photo. Film wasn't cheap back then. Rachel nodded slowly, but kept her focus on the children. Something didn't add up. Both girls were wearing identical dresses. Fine fabric, lace collars, decorative ribbons. It was more than unusual. At that time, clothing made class distinctions very clear. "Take a look at this," Rachel said. "Same dress, same trim, but one of the girls is white and the other is black. In 1889, that doesn't make sense. Wealthy families didn't dress black children, especially not servants, in the same expensive clothes as their own children." James studied the photo more carefully. Maybe she was adopted or taken in as a ward. "Maybe," Rachel said, though she didn't sound convinced. Adopting black children wasn't common in that time period, especially not among white elite families. And even when children were taken in, they weren't usually dressed like biological family members. They were kept separate. She kept looking, trying to capture every detail. The blonde girl held a wooden horse and beamed with a bright, genuine smile. The black girl was reaching for a pile of wooden blocks. Her expression was harder to read, blurred slightly in the background. "I'm going to get a high-res scan of this," Rachel said, picking up the photo. "There's something here. I need to take a closer look." 3 days later, in her small office, Rachel stared at the portrait blown up across 2 computer monitors. She'd been combing through every inch of the image, logging all the details for the archive. The family in the portrait had been identified from accompanying documents. The Richmond of Boston, Jonathan Richmond, a successful shipping magnate, his wife Caroline, and their children Thomas and Catherine. But the 2 girls in the background weren't mentioned anywhere. No names, no clues. She zoomed in on the black child, carefully adjusting the image contrast and sharpness. The blonde girl, clearly a Richmond based on the documents, still held the toy horse, smiling brightly. But when Rachel focused on the other girl, something caught her attention. Her hand froze on the mouse. She leaned in, face nearly touching the screen. There were marks on the girl's wrists, faint but visible, not the scrapes of rough play. These were something else. Perfect circular impressions, darker than surrounding skin, as if something had been wrapped around them tightly for a long time. Rachel's breath caught. She zoomed out, then looked at the girl's legs. The dress had shifted slightly as she played, revealing one ankle. More marks. Same shape. Same dark circles. Restraint marks. Rachel had seen these before in old photographs of formerly enslaved people, in medical records from the 1800s, and in abolitionist materials meant to document the cruelty of bondage. These weren't minor bruises. They were the kind of scars left by shackles or chains. But how could that be? Slavery had ended in 1865. The 13th Amendment had abolished it across the United States. This portrait was taken in 1889, 24 years after emancipation. No child in Boston, especially not in a wealthy household, should have marks like that. Rachel's thoughts raced. She remembered the whispers from her grad school years, stories that had never made the textbooks, quiet rumors about children who'd been kept as servants long after slavery was abolished, held in homes, unrecorded, not legally enslaved, but treated as if they were. She grabbed her phone and called James. "I need you to come to my office." "Now." "What's wrong?" he asked. "You sound." The Richmond portrait. The girl in the background. "James, I think we found something terrible." 20 minutes later, James stood next to her, eyes locked on the screen. His face went pale. "Those are restraint marks," he said softly. "Rachel, that's exactly what they look like." "I know," she whispered. "But that can't be right. It's Boston. It's 1889. They stared at the screen. The marks weren't going away. The evidence was right there, and neither of them could explain it. Within the hour, 3 more researchers from the Historical Society had gathered in Rachel's office. All of them studied the enlarged image in silence. Once you saw the marks, they were impossible to unsee. Circles on the wrist and ankle that spoke of physical restraint, of something that shouldn't have existed in a post-slavery North. Dr. Patricia Williams, the Society's director, took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. She'd spent her whole career studying American history, but this image shook everything she thought she understood. "Are we absolutely sure?" she asked. "Could these be shadows or scanning errors?" Rachel shook her head. "I checked everything. Different enhancement tools, multiple scans. The marks are real, and this was only the beginning. I've spoken with a forensic photographer from the police department." Rachel said quietly, "These marks, they're not photographic flaws. They're real. They match the physical signs of prolonged restraint." She zoomed in on another part of the image. Just above the child's lace collar, a faint bruise was visible around her neck. Subtle, but there. The discoloration was partly hidden by the fabric, but once you saw it, you couldn't ignore it. James leaned back, his face drawn. "If this is what we think it is, we're staring at evidence of slavery, illegal slavery, still happening in Boston, nearly 25 years after it was outlawed, and in one of the city's richest, most respected homes." "We have to identify this child," said Patricia, her voice calm but firm. "And we need to understand exactly what was happening in the Richmond household. This isn't just a mystery. It's the possible record of a crime, a grave injustice." She turned to Rachel. "You'll lead this investigation. Use every tool you need. Archives, expert consultations, full funding. Find the truth." Rachel dove in head first. Over the next week, she traced everything she could about the Richmonds. The family was well known in Boston's upper circles. Jonathan Richmond had made a fortune after the Civil War, running a shipping company that transported cotton, tobacco, and manufactured goods between northern and southern ports. They were public figures. Newspaper clippings from the 1880s showed them attending grand galas, hosting glittering parties, donating to charities. Outwardly, they were model citizens. But public image rarely tells a whole story. Rachel searched for private records. The 1890 census would have been her next stop, but most of it had been destroyed in a fire, leaving a frustrating gap. Instead, she went back to the 1880 census. There they were, Jonathan and Caroline Richmond, their children, Thomas, born in 1872, Catherine, born in 1875, and Margaret, born in 1882. 3 children. That matched the photo exactly. The 2 teens standing with their parents, and the blonde girl in the background, Margaret, about 7 years old in 1889. But there was no sign of the other child. No 4th child listed. No servants. No wards. No other names. Officially, the black girl in the photo didn't exist. Rachel stared at the census record on her screen. "You were there," she whispered. "But no one recorded your name. Why?" She kept digging through employment files, household ledgers, church records, school enrollment lists. Still nothing. It was like the child had lived only inside that one photograph. Then, in the Massachusetts State Archives, Rachel found something unexpected, a private letter collection from a woman named Helen Bradford. Helen had been a contemporary of Caroline Richmond, part of the same social circle. The letters had been donated long ago, and most had never been fully cataloged. They were stored in temperature-controlled boxes, faded but intact. Most of them were typical of the time: talk of dresses, parties, gossip. But then came a letter dated March 1888. Helen wrote to her sister in New York. "Caroline Richmond continues to host the most elegant teas. Though I must say her household is unusual. She keeps that little colored girl about, always dressed just like her Margaret. The two are like twins, inseparable. Margaret adores her, calls her dearest friend. Caroline says the girl is an orphan she's taken in as an act of charity. But I've never seen a charity case wearing imported French lace and silk ribbons. The girl never speaks, just stands near Margaret like a shadow. There's something off about it." Rachel's hand shook as she snapped a photo of the letter with her phone. This was confirmation. The child was real. She lived in the Richmond household, dressed to match Margaret, treated almost like family. But something was deeply wrong. If she had been taken in as a ward, why the matching clothes? And more importantly, why the marks of restraint? Rachel kept reading. Across the following months, Helen continued to write about the mysterious girl. In a letter from June 1889, just before the photograph was taken, she wrote, "I went to Caroline's garden party. Margaret and that colored girl were playing on the lawn. Odd thing, despite the heat, the girl wore long sleeves. I asked Caroline, and she brushed me off, saying the child had sensitive skin. But Martha Aldrich told me later she'd seen bruises on the girl's arms when the sleeves slipped up." And then a letter dated November 1889, months after the photo. "There are whispers about the Richmond home. The little colored girl is gone. Caroline says she was sent to relatives in the South. But Mary Blackwood swears she heard terrible crying one night from the upstairs rooms. When she asked the staff, none would answer. The servants have been sworn to silence. Jonathan Richmond now refuses visitors. Margaret is heartbroken. She cries for her lost friend." Rachel's pen flew across the page as she scribbled notes. The timeline was becoming clear. The two girls, Margaret and her unnamed friend, had been close. The photos showed them side by side in identical dresses. Then, not long after, the black child disappeared. No record, no explanation, just a vague story about relatives. But the letters painted a more chilling picture. Mysterious injuries, sudden silence, and then gone. What had happened to her? The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing record from Richmond Shipping Business, Rachel discovered that his company had kept meticulous ledgers, detailed logs of cargo, passengers, and transactions. Every voyage was documented down to the last crate and coin. These records had been donated to the Maritime Museum in Salem years ago. One cold February morning, Rachel drove north to the coast. Snow from the previous night still clung to the roadside, and the sky hung low and gray. The museum was housed in an old warehouse overlooking the harbor. Inside, she was greeted by Peter Donnelly, an elderly archivist who offered a warm smile as she stamped snow from her boots. "The Richmond Shipping Company records," he said, leading her into the archive. Fascinating stuff. He documented everything. Most shipping firms kept basic ledgers. But Richmond, he was obsessed with detail. And buried in that detail, Rachel hoped, might be the next piece of the puzzle. "What exactly are you hoping to find?" Peter Donnelly asked as he led Rachel through the rows of archival boxes. "Passenger manifests from the late 1880s, she replied. "Especially voyages coming to or from southern ports, Charleston, Savannah, and New Orleans." Peter nodded knowingly and began pulling several boxes off the shelves. Each one was carefully labeled by year and route. Richmond did regular trade with all those cities. Cotton, tobacco coming north, textiles and machinery going south. Let's start here. 1887, 1888, 1889. Rachel sat down at a long research table, slipped on cotton gloves, and opened the first box. The paper was delicate with age, filled with tight cursive handwriting documenting every detail of business. Page after page listed cargo shipments, trade goods, and passenger names. Most were routine. Businessmen heading north for meetings, families relocating between cities, immigrants continuing their journeys after docking in Boston. Then, in the manifest dated July 12, 1887, Rachel stopped cold. She read the line once, then again and again, just to be sure. SS Marianne. Route, Charleston to Boston. Cargo, cotton, tobacco, naval stores. Passengers, Mr. Jonathan Richmond returning, Mr. Charles Whitmore merchant, Mrs. Adelaide Foster, and 2 children relocation. Also transported, child Negro female, approximately 5 years of age, traveling in care of Mr. Jonathan Richmond. No name recorded. Declared as domestic servant. Rachel's hands trembled as she took a photo of the page. A 5-year-old child, brought from Charleston to Boston under Richmond's care. No name, just a line of bureaucratic language. Child Negro female. Declared as a servant. She flipped through the remaining manifests with a new urgency. Was there any record of her return? Weeks passed. Then she found it. A second entry, dated August 23rd, 1889. SS Marianne. Route, Boston to Charleston. Cargo, textiles, machinery, manufactured goods. Passengers, Mrs. Caroline Richmond, business travel. Mr. Thomas Blackwood, merchant. Also transported, child Negro female, approximately 7 years of age, traveling in care of Mrs. Caroline Richmond. No name recorded. Declared as returning to family. Rachel stared at the document, her breath caught in her chest. The timeline lined up exactly. Brought north in July 1887 at age 5. Photographed in 1889, age 7. Sent back to Charleston that August, shortly after the photograph was taken. Returning to family, she whispered. But nothing in the letter suggested any family ties in the South. No contact, no visits. The phrase sounded more like an excuse than the truth, a way to hide something darker. Her investigation turned south. If the child had come from Charleston, maybe someone there still had records, or even memories passed down through generations. Rachel reached out to Dr. Marcus Freeman, a historian at the College of Charleston who specialized in post-Reconstruction African-American life. She told him everything. The photo, the marks, the manifest entries, the lack of records. Marcus listened carefully. On a video call, his face filled her screen. Silver streaks in his hair, eyes heavy with both wisdom and sorrow. What you're describing, he said, is clandestine servitude. After the Civil War, it didn't just end overnight. Wealthy families found ways to keep control. They called it by different names: apprenticeships, charity, guardianship, but it was still slavery. Rachel shook her head. But in Boston, in 1889, Marcus looked tired. Even there, especially when children had no birth certificates, no legal guardians, no one to speak for them. During Reconstruction, thousands of black children were left vulnerable. Their parents were dead, displaced, or too poor to resist. Families were told their children would have opportunities up north, education, a better life. But once taken, these kids had no way to prove their freedom. They became invisible. He promised to search Charleston's archives for anything: records, reports, even family oral histories. Anything connected to the Richmonds or to missing children from that time. 3 days later, he called Rachel back. "I found something," he said. His voice was tight, his words careful. Charleston police records from July 1887. A black family named Wallace reported their daughter missing. Rachel leaned forward. What date? July 9th, just 3 days before Richmond transported a 5-year-old girl to Boston. Her heart dropped. What was her name? Sarah Wallace. According to the report, she had last been seen near the Charleston docks early in the morning. The family claimed that a well-dressed white man had approached them with promises, offers of education, and a better life in the North. The child's mother, Clara Wallace, had refused, but the next morning, Sarah was gone. Marcus paused before continuing. The police didn't take the case seriously. The detective wrote that the child probably wandered off, or that the family was exaggerating. The file was closed within a week. Rachel stared at her screen in silence. After all this time, the child in the photograph finally had a name. Sarah Wallace. She wasn't just a face in the background. She was a daughter. She was missed. She had a family. Rachel's voice caught in her throat. Do the Wallaces have any living relatives? Anyone still in Charleston who might remember her story? Marcus hesitated. I found death certificates. Clara died in 1892, just 3 years after Sarah was reportedly sent back to Charleston. If she ever came back at all. Samuel Wallace, Sarah's father, had passed away in 1896. But Rachel found a clue in Clara's obituary. She'd been survived by a son named Samuel, their firstborn, named after his father. Marcus was already working to trace his descendants. Give me a few more days, he said. 2 weeks later, Rachel found herself standing in front of a modest house in Charleston, South Carolina. Her heart was pounding, part nerves, part hope. The home was small but tidy, blue shutters freshly painted, flower boxes under the windows. Beside her stood Dr. Marcus Freeman, who had offered to make the introduction. The door opened. Grace Robinson, 87 years old, with silver hair and a tight bun, stood in the doorway. Arthritis had bent her fingers, but her eyes were sharp and full of life. You found something about my family? Grace asked as she welcomed them inside. The living room was cozy, filled with framed photos and treasured keepsakes. Rachel hesitated, unsure how to begin. How do you tell someone you've uncovered a century-old wound? That you found a child's name, but not her ending? My grandmother told me the stories, Grace said softly, sitting down across from them. Stories about the sister who was taken. They were told over and over, mother to daughter. We never stopped grieving. She paused, letting the memory rise. My great-grandfather Samuel, Sarah's brother, spent years searching for her. He never gave up. Grace reached for a small wooden box on a nearby shelf. Its corners were worn smooth. Inside were family photographs, old letters, and a journal. This was his, she said. He taught himself to read and write, and he kept a diary. Rachel opened the journal gently, the cracked leather and brittle pages whispering of time. The handwriting was careful but unpolished. July 15th, 1887. Sarah's gone. Mama says a white man took her from near the docks this morning. He promised her work up north, schooling money for the family. Papa tried to stop him. Said Sarah was too young. The man laughed. Police won't help us. They say she wandered off. They say we're just causing trouble. August 3rd, 1887. Still no word. Mama cries every night. She sleeps in Sarah's bed holding her doll. I pray she's safe. I want to believe that man told the truth. But Papa says his eyes were cold. Says he's seen men like that before. December 25th, 1887. Christmas without Sarah. Mama made her favorite cake, sweet potato with molasses. We couldn't eat it. We left a slice at her place, just in case. Does she remember us? Does she know we're still looking? The entries went on. Year after year, Samuel Wallace recorded holidays, memories, prayers, and always Sarah. Then came September 1889. A letter came today. No name, just a Boston postmark. Inside, a photograph. Mama screamed when she saw it. It's Sarah. She's alive, dressed like a rich white girl, playing on a rug. Another girl beside her. Same dress, same ribbons. But Mama says her eyes aren't right. She says Sarah looks scared. Not hurt, just scared in a way that doesn't go away. Rachel looked up at Grace. Someone in that house wanted your family to know Sarah was alive. Grace nodded through tears. My grandmother said Samuel kept that photograph his entire life. He'd sit with it for hours, trying to understand, wondering if she was okay, wondering if she needed help that never came. Back in Boston, Rachel followed this new thread. If someone in the Richmond household had sent the photograph, maybe there were others who had seen what was happening, others who felt uneasy or even tried to intervene. She found employment records in the Massachusetts State Archives. At the time, households with more than 3 domestic workers had to file employee records with the state: names, wages, years of service. In 1889, the Richmond household employed 5 people: Elizabeth Brennan, the cook; Dorothy Hayes, the housekeeper; Mary O'Brien and Ann Sullivan, maids; Thomas Murphy, the groundskeeper. Rachel began the slow work of tracing their lives. Most left behind only fragments. Brennan died childless in 1901. Hayes had moved west and disappeared from records. Sullivan died young, a victim of the influenza outbreak. But Mary O'Brien left a trail. She had married, raised children, and her descendants still lived in the Boston area. Rachel reached out and connected with her great-grandson, Thomas O'Brien, a high school history teacher in Dorchester. When she explained her research, he didn't hesitate. "My great-grandmother worked for a family named Richmond," he said. "She never talked about it much, but she left letters. My mother saved them. Come by tomorrow. I want to know what really happened." The next evening, Rachel sat at his dining room table, flipping through a box of old papers. Thomas watched quietly as she read. "She came over from Ireland in 1887, he explained. She was only 17. She was so proud to get a position with a wealthy family. But she only stayed 2 years. No one ever knew why. The letters were addressed to her sister Bridget, who had stayed behind in County Cork. They had been returned to Mary after Bridget's death and saved by the family. May 1889. Dear Bridget, there is wickedness in this house, though it hides behind silk curtains and charity donations. They keep a poor colored child locked in the nursery at night. I've seen the chains on her bed frame. Heard them rattle when I brought up breakfast. Mrs. Richmond says it's for her own good that Sarah wanders, but I know cruelty when I see it. I saw enough in Ireland. She cries for her mama every night. Little Margaret begs to let her sleep in her room, but Mr. Richmond won't allow it. Says Sarah needs to learn her place. What place? She's a child, no different from Margaret, except her skin." Rachel blinked back tears. "She knew her name," she whispered. July 1889. "They say the colored child is being sent back to the South. But I don't believe it. I helped pack her trunk. There were no nice dresses, just rags. Where did her fine clothes go? Why send her home like that, unless she is really going home? I asked Mrs. Richmond. She told me to mind my business, or leave." With Mary's letters, Samuel Wallace's journal, and the shipping records, Rachel had finally pieced together Sarah Wallace's story. She presented her findings in a packed conference room at the Massachusetts Historical Society. Board members, journalists, and members of both the Richmond and Wallace families. As she stood at the front of the room, holding a copy of the photograph that started it all, she took a deep breath. In July 1887, Jonathan Richmond traveled to Charleston on business. And Sarah's story, silent for over a century, was finally about to be told. Rachel stood before the audience, her voice calm but heavy with truth. On the screen behind her glowed the enhanced image, Sarah Wallace's small, haunting face. "In 1887, she said, Jonathan Richmond took 5-year-old Sarah from Charleston, promising her family a better life in Boston. But she wasn't brought north for kindness. She was taken to serve the Richmond's daughter, Margaret. By night, Sarah was chained to her bed. This wasn't charity. It was slavery hidden in plain sight. When asked what became of Sarah, Rachel answered quietly, 'We don't know. She vanished from all records after 1889. Months later, the Massachusetts Historical Society opened Invisible Children, honoring those lost to secret servitude. At its center hung the Richmond portrait. Sarah's face enlarged, finally seen. Grace Robinson, her descendant, whispered she was brave. Across America, new faces were being found, new names spoken. The work of remembering had only begun.